Pollard blew me away in this interview. He's a role model of mine, and I knew it was going to be a fantastic interview. His cultural perspective, combined with so many years of experience, makes him an amazing guest and an amazing person, to be honest. You have to excuse some of the parts where I'm speechless or nervous, because Mark is the real deal. We didn't follow an outline or script in this episode, we just got right into it, and I appreciate that about him. We talked about the modern ad school system in America, breaking into strategy, the types of strategies out there, side hustles and burnout, informational interviews and how to reach out to people, and his thoughts, takeaways, and advice from his career. Man, there's some good stuff in here, and I'm so excited for you guys to listen. But also, be sure to reach out to him. You can listen to his podcast he hosts. It's called Sweathead. You probably know it. It's got like 500,000 plus listens. You should buy his new book out just now called Strategy is Your Words, and go follow him on LinkedIn and all social media. If you want to find those links, you have to go to our Instagram @enteringad to find those. And they're all there, and they're excellent resources that I highly recommend. So, without further ado, this is the Breaking and Entering podcast, and I am your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. Mark Pollard, welcome to the Breaking and Entering podcast. I'm super excited to have you on today.
Gino Schellenberger, or should I call you Gino Schellenberger?
That sounds pretty good.
I'll just go early with the nicknames, and I've been talking a bit about that with people recently. And the thing about your first name is it is already an Australian nickname, because we often shorten the name and then add an O onto it. So Gino, perfect Australian nickname. I wonder if your parents knew that when they gave it to you.
No, I don't. It's actually short. It is a nickname actually for Gennaro. Gennaro is my full name, Italian.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot, Gennaro Schellenberger. You got a lot of European influence in those letters there.
When I was younger, I was terrified of learning how to spell Schellenberger, which is 14 letters. And
it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have you on. And would you be Marco? How would that be the nickname?
I'm such an independent spirit that no nicknames are really stuck with me. I've had things like Marco Polo. I've had Marky Mark. I've had Marcus Aurelius. I've had Marcus. There's not a lot that really sticks. But I go early with a nickname. So I was a bit disappointed to see that your first name is a nickname.
I feel like different friend groups have different nicknames, or different people you're surrounded by, spheres that might have different names for you. Is that true in your case?
Sort of, but I always move between groups. So, I've also been in the same relationship for 20 plus years. So I'm not out there. I wasn't out there in my 20s, like making a ton of new friends, except through like the music industry that I was a part of. But yeah, like my name, maybe Polly. There's a few, but they don't really stick. You could do a Shelley with yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Shelley is one.
Do you get that?
Yeah, I get G Shelley. That's a big one.
There you go.
Well, cool. Yeah, I mean, I want to talk advertising with you. Like I said before, talking to all my friends and seeing, being a follower of your podcast, you were just responding to a simple, do you want to come on my show? And you saying yes was quite fantastic. And, it's kind of, I think it's kind of amazing nowadays, the willingness people have to show up on these types of things, or just have these conversations. As students, we could be intimidated by reaching out to high profile people like yourself. So I was just shocked when you said that you'd be willing to come on.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. I definitely relate to I think it's a fact, or the thought that it's a little easier than ever to get people who are out on the internet. I don't know if I'm high profile. I just have, I'm an introvert with social needs. So that's what the podcast and a lot of my writing is actually about, seeking validation through words and ideas. And, otherwise I'm relatively a distant character. But I grew up on the internet. I've been doing the internet since I was a teenager. And the thing that I loved about it is that you could get access to people that you'd never get access to elsewhere. And for me, it was like in the mid to late 90s, I started making websites about rap, like underground rap, and then I took over a hip hop radio show, and I was interviewing people like Ice Cube and Flavor Flav at a really young age.
That's so
And part
cool.
of it was because of the phone, but also people assumed that I was 5 or 10 years older, and because I have a deep mumbly voice, they also would have kept assuming that I was older than I was. But I was doing stuff at the age of 19 or 20 because of the internet. And so I think it's, for me, it's not even like, should I do this? It's just, if you can make yourself available and someone's interested, why wouldn't you?
That's right. And that's why I kind of stress to all of the listeners out there is that, all it takes is to reach out in some way, whether it's email or LinkedIn. And the worst that can happen, really, in my situation, is they don't respond.
Yeah.
And nobody ever
Yeah.
says no. It's just like they
No,
don't,
no.
don't respond.
And most people respond to me these days when I reach out, but I also wanted to mention that I do think the advertising industry itself, and it's generally pretty cutthroat. It's pretty competitive and sometimes elitist. And sometimes that elitism is actually built in because in some countries, the advertising industry has been formed mostly by people in the upper middle class and sometimes the upper class. That's simplistic, but that exists. And so there can be a certain arrogance within parts of the world, but that's been shifting. And so I've also had a similar response as perhaps the one that you've had to me chatting with you, which is weird for me to discuss, but where especially with like really high profile English people in advertising, where they're happy to have a chat and we get into like their childhood or mental health challenges. And I'm like, wow, there's no way they would have done that 10 years ago, because the main media, or the main way that people expressed, was either really in blogs. So there was this little blogosphere of people in advertising, largely planners talking
Mhm.
about planning, right?
Sure.
Or it was the traditional trade press, which was very PR controlled. So there's definitely been a shift and
Yeah.
an eagerness and an openness to being honest and helpful. It's been great to see.
And do you think that's been accelerated due to the pandemic even more so?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think there's a certain ferocity, desperation, and anger and resentment and panic out there, but that's also like mirrored might not be the right word, but the opposite of that is like there are also people doing really well right now. And so that can cause some conflict. So in some respects, I think because of the pandemic, because people are having to wake up and see themselves in the mirror in the day, every day, and they might not see many other people, that there might be a certain wrestle with like what's true and how do I put that out into the world. And at the same time, a ton of people are lost right now and they're not sure what they're allowed to feel and think, and then others are doing really well. So I don't know if it's any more than before. I know personally that I've been pretty productive. I tried to stay pretty productive. It's a dangerous word, that word productive, but I've been pretty productive through the pandemic because it helps me with my own mental health, honestly. And I got a
Interesting.
family to feed. But
That helps too to
but also,
motivate.
yeah, well, both of those things are, you got to pay attention to them at some point. Uh,
So,
but also, but also, like I've had days and weeks where I've just felt pretty listless and like, "Ugh, I don't know, should I really put anything out right now? Who needs it? The
so
world's
what keeps you
crazy."
going at those days? Like I've had with just this podcast, and it's a much smaller scale than what you're up to. What pushes you on those days when you wake up and you're like, I don't really want to do this interview, or I don't really want to, you know, put this content out there. What do you say to
Yeah, I mean,
yourself in that moment?
first of all, sometimes I don't. I cut myself some slack, take some time off. Sometimes I get sick of myself. If there was a period there where I was making daily strategy classes, I made 100 from a book that I'd written that's 400 pages, and I would be reading parts of the book out or making like audio or vocalized video material based on the book while doing interviews for the podcast or doing live sessions in Sweathead. And I'll be like, dude, I think we've had enough of you today. So just stop. But really, over the years, it's that I've connected what I do right now to who I am. I do what I do because I need to do it. And when someone asks about running a podcast or starting a magazine or writing a book or whatever they want to do, let's say someone in the industry wants to be more active on LinkedIn, do it because you have a need to express. If you don't have a need to express, it's not going to last and you will come across a bit shallow and, maybe a little cynical as well. And so for me, it's like, this is who I am. I have to express. And then the fact that there's a good, boisterous, supportive community in Sweathead I'm like, who can I help today? How can I contribute? And it's not that I've got some kind of savior complex,
Hmm.
but I do find there's additional psychological benefits, selfish psychological benefits in focusing on, okay, I had this conversation with someone who's much younger than me. They've just lost their job. They're in this situation. I mean, I might as well put something out about that, right? So I'll go and do it. So it's this combination of identity, understanding who I am and that I have a need to express. And then it does connect with a sense of how I can contribute to this community.
I like that. I like how you mentioned if you have the need to express. And a lot of times in these interviews, guests will talk about how you need to have a side hustle, especially for those who are recent grads or students in general in college. Is this true that you need a side hustle? You need to have something to show to get into the industry to break in that first job, and that need for
Yeah,
expression?
maybe, but do it because it's who you are. You got to ask yourself, if you're not drawn to expressing, yet you think you want a strategy job or a job in a creative department, what's that about? That's a weird riddle, right? Do it. Surely you're drawn to being a strategist, and hopefully, definitely, to being an art director, a copywriter, or whatever it is, because you need to express. You want to express, but you have to work out how to do that within some kind of industry that pays you because you live in a capitalistic society. So I don't. I side hustle, I think, is a bit of a misdirection. I would give it a little bit of texture. Two key points. One is, if you need to express, if you want to get good at anything, you have to have a practice. You have to have things that you can do that help you get better. And if you're about expression, those things that will get you better could be anything from writing a page once a week or every day or whatever you want to, or trying to do your own writing or art projects once a year, whatever the cadence is that's enough for you to bear, that pushes you beyond your limits, that helps you get feedback and also helps you build a social network and a professional network. I think you just need to do that if you're really about expressing. Okay.
Okay, question then.
Yeah.
If you want to be a strategist and you need practice, what would you do if you were trying to break in then for that expression purpose?
Well, you got to separate the idea of breaking in from the idea of practice. Because also, what I was going to say is that if we focus on breaking in, there's a ton of luck involved. And I do get
Hmm.
nervous that in America, a lot of people do go to college and they study advertising here. I worked in some good place. I was fortunate to work in good places in Australia. I don't think I worked with anyone who studied advertising in university or college ever in over 10 years. People might have studied design or fine art or English or writing, for example. Many in the creative department would have done like a 3-month portfolio school situation. The stakes and the world is different, generally speaking, but America puts a lot of pressure on kids to kind of specialize at a young age, even though I know many people get that 1 year of slightly more generalized education when they leave high school. But then there's this real careerism and corporatism from a super young age here, where you've got to know your story. You have to prove that you're an important individual. Everyone around you tells you that you're an important individual. You practice this narrative, and then you go through high school. And if you're fortunate enough to go to college, you get a huge amount of college debt. It's crazy. And then you're like, hang on, now I'm supposed to get a strategy job, aren't I? Isn't that how it works? Not really. I didn't have a full-time strategy role till I was 28. Not that my experience has to generalize to anyone, but I just feel that the expectations that are brewed are honestly to convince people and to hypnotize them into being obedient members of capitalism. And it's not that I'm anti capitalism. I enjoy it. It's been good to me. It's
Hmm.
just that sometimes we need to see things for what they are. So then you get to the thing of breaking in. That's a relative, you could have many different types of answers to that. Luck is really, really important. I do believe that if you want a strategy role at some point, that a person looking to hire you, depending on the type of agency and the type of hirer, because a lot of strategy bosses are different. Not everyone's like me.
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe I'm a small group, but I know people like me. And then there are people who are more formal and they love big words and fancy clothes and fancy cars. And they don't care about, you know, more of a street version of strategy, which is what I think I'm interested in. But at some point, you need to provoke the brain of someone hiring you or someone who knows someone who's going to hire you. So, very difficult to do through a CV, very difficult to do just because you've got a LinkedIn page. So, at some point, you're going to need something somewhere to show people how you think and to show that you've got initiative. The challenge with what I just said is that that can get really misunderstood and it can get exaggerated into this thing called a side hustle. I
Hmm.
happened to spend years in my 20s making a rap magazine when the computers were I'd be up at 4 a.m. burning a CD-ROM of my files, and chances are the first burn wouldn't work, so I'd do it again. It would take 2 or 3 hours. I did it because that's what I wanted to do. I would never suggest for younger people that that's what you have to do. You don't have to be up all night and burning out every 3 months or like and falling in a pile like I used to do. But it's not good enough just to have a CV. Most of the portfolios I see out of the college world, there's a handful that stand out. I've seen hundreds, not thousands. I've seen hundreds. There's a
Okay.
handful that stand out every time. So how are you going to stand out against everybody else? And for me, you could stand out with a short story, a poem, just a thing that you did, and that's going to captivate my brain because there can be a point when you're looking to hire that your eyes gloss over because you're just seeing the same stuff and it looks like someone's coached it, and you're looking for an individual. You're looking for someone with a thing to prove and a vibe. Again, there are many corporate agencies. They won't look for any of that. They're just good with the school that you went to, the grades that you got, and that's that. But there is also a smaller group of people who run strategy departments, and they want to have a group of maybe misfits, people from different backgrounds, and they want you to poke them in the brain.
Hmm.
So side hustle, that could be too punitive. It could like be like, because the thing I was going to say is that, sometimes people can't afford the time or money if there's money involved to put into a side hustle. You might be
Right.
taking care of an elderly loved one, or you might be working 3 jobs, or you've got $70,000 in college debt, and like you're just exhausted, or you're going through difficult things in life. So that's where I think side hustle by itself it's not wrong. It's just a bit exaggerated and a bit of a red herring. The thing is, at some point, you got to turn someone's brain on, and the traditional tools of CV and possibly portfolio aren't always enough to do it.
Love that. So provoke, you said specifically provoke the brain of the strategist hiring you, or provoke the brain of the person that's going to get you in front of that hiring manager.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Interesting.
I guess there's this thought that I've played around with. So I've been to a bunch of colleges and also advertising portfolio schools, and I've done talks and for weekends or just for a night. Usually, I'll get cornered at the end as a bit of an awkward introvert. Bit of an awkward introvert. I'll get cornered by an extrovert who throws what I now call a passion tantrum, and they stand there and they're like, "Oh, I'm so passionate about advertising. I'm so passionate. I'm so passionate. I just want to get a job. I'm so passionate." And, there's part of me where I'm like, "Whoa, I get it. This feels really abusive, though. Could you back off and allow me to talk to some of the introverts who are, like, standing behind you?" And here's the thing, all I'm gonna ask you is, and first of all, if, like, you just want a job, it's a bit of a weird way to approach someone who's just come off a stage. But if you're just gonna throw if you're gonna throw a passion tantrum, someone's gonna say, "Well, what have you done?" I was passionate about rap. I made a rap magazine.
Yeah.
I know it's not easy, and I'm not saying that in, like, a yucky way, but like if you're passionate, you're going to have done something. So it's not good enough to throw a passion tantrum. So that's one concept that I think is useful and that people can pay attention to. The second thing is the idea of intellectual brinkmanship. So when I talk about provoking or poking a boss in the brain, intellectual brinkmanship is when you look at someone's work, which again, it could be a haiku. It could be the way they sent an email. It doesn't have to be a full side hustle. It could be a
Mhm.
book, whatever. Choose your part of the spectrum. And you're looking at what this person's sent you that other people haven't done because they've just filled in the CV with all this robotic language. And you're like, whoa, this person seems a bit scary. I wonder if I could bring them in. And then you have a bit of a game with them. Now, that's what not a game, like I don't play games with people, but like
Mhm.
I'm curious about the brain. But again, I'm different to a lot of people who are more about dominance and control and top down hierarchy. I'm more like more interested in flat hierarchy and allowing people to explore the things that make them good and make them excited. And then the third concept, when we talk about getting someone else to make a recommendation, really comes from something that we know is true that we can point to in research. But there was a book called Obliquity by John Kay, and he was an economist who quit that world because he said, I just spent 20 years making financial models to prove decisions that had already been made. And obliquity is a fancy abstract word for basically the word indirect. So, as far as he is concerned, the indirect way is the way. Now, you all know that. It's when you hit someone up on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, can you introduce me to my boss?" that's a version of the indirect way, but it's better, I believe, to also have something that person could pass on that doesn't feel
Mhm.
so transactional. Like, here's my haiku. So there's a few concepts that come into play with the stuff that we're talking about.
Oh, so let me just with the being obliquity being indirect then, you say that's better than, just going straight for the target person?
Do what you want,
Yeah.
test it. Obliquity indirect is very useful, and word of mouth tends to be the number one most reason that people buy things
Yeah,
in many categories.
especially
Right.
for Gen Z,
Yeah.
word of mouth.
I think it's for everyone. I think it's for the majority of categories. But you know what? I've
Yeah.
never seen an infinite breakdown of research about word of mouth and how it influences
Yeah.
every single purchase that's ever been made. But it's up there, right? It's the same dynamics at play.
So I think with a lot of things you're saying, and you've been to a lot of different countries and you've seen how different ad industries work in these different countries. I want to go back to kind of like the US and the approach that they have for students at and your freshman year of college. Um, and I want to tell you about my experience real quick and maybe how we
Mhm.
can break that down and approach it from a different cultural thought process or from a way that you would look at it. So I think
Mhm.
you start off in college, and that's where I went to school, which nothing wrong with that. But the way that they kind of train you and um, carve the path for you is it the end goal is to become a strategist at a mid to large traditional ad agency. And that's kind of like the path that they teach you. You can, if you're real creative and you know that at an early age, and there are routes that you can go to specialize in that. But for the most part, if you're not super creative, you're not taking those creative classes with Peter Sheldon, you're going straight into strategy. So, is that how most schools that you've traveled across the country operate, where they kind of hold your hand into a strategy at a traditional agency?
Maybe I don't even know, because usually when I go around, I'm like, how does this work? Because I've never really seen it before. And from what I understand, you can see the advertising class sitting in different kinds of faculty. Is that right as well? Like, maybe it's in media and communications, maybe it's in marketing and business. I don't really have enough knowledge. I've spoken to a lot of people about it, but mostly I'm just like, honestly, is this a good thing? To
Hmm.
be specializing in working in advertising at such a young age, when you could be studying psychology or philosophy or maybe economics if you're numbers oriented, which is what your peers in England would be doing. Like, the amazing and challenging thing about England is, to be simplistic, a lot of the people at that age that get into advertising, or that have gotten into advertising, a lot but not all, have gone to Oxford or Cambridge. So like your
Hmm.
Yale or your Harvard, right? And they've studied the classic philosophy, etc. And they're often extremely articulate, and they've had to debate, and that's why there's a certain intellectuality around the English advertising world, from what I understand, and also because many people came from very fancy backgrounds as well. That's quite different to America, where America as a country is much more about execution than thinking, and that I think is historically accurate and written about. And I'm not saying that either is better than the other. So then, when it comes down to advertising in college, I everywhere's different. I couldn't break it down. I've not researched it, but I would just hope. First of all, I feel for professors these days. I know there are professors who aren't that good, or lecturers who aren't that good, but you've got all this rate my professor stuff. I mean, God,
Yeah.
imagine just having an off class because someone in your family passed away, or you were struggling like with a divorce, and then you get a bunch of kids, 10 of them just dissing you in public on the internet about how pathetic you are. And so you again, education here is about getting a job, it's about certification, and it's about fulfilling this capitalistic dream. And I've spoken to a few professors outside of advertising, and they're like, you'd have to do in most places, especially in a private or a high paying, an expensive college situation, you'd have to do pretty bad to fail, because they're like, we just want to move you on, and basically want to take the money.
Hmm.
But the thing about advertising, I hope it gets discussed enough, and it does, I believe, by the people who I'm close to, is like, you're talking about critical thinking, about problem solving, about empathy, about trying to understand the world and history and psychology, and how it all connects, because that's what advertising is. advertising is not about a portfolio. That's part of it. But if you start there and you're just doing portfolio school, which is important, you're going to miss the subtext and the actual richness of it. And chances are you're kind of having a factory like educational experience.
Yeah. And I think that's the importance then when you're in this curriculum and, at uh, whether at Yale or University of Illinois or wherever you're at, some school in the US, if you're studying advertising, it's kind of known as like kind of like an easy major. There's not a lot of math involved, but those who do really well are those that find out how to apply real world learning. So getting in those clubs, getting in activities where you have a client or you're creating ads for a real person. Those are the people that do well in those group settings, and I think that's like where they really get the ball right at where I went to school. Um, that they preach that early on that the curriculum is one thing, but getting your hands on it is the other more important part.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that rings true. It's interesting because I feel there's a slightly different hiring pool here, and I do think part of it comes down to what you just said, that advertising is seen as an easy major. A lot of the people I know in strategy and planning in other parts of the world, they didn't do that as a major. Most of them would have gone to university or college. So yes, there's a bias there. There are potentially issues there because that is a very fortunate thing to be able to do in most parts of the world throughout history. However, many of them would have gone on to do masters, or there's a certain intellectuality in them versus this. Advertising seems fun, and I can get into it. It's easy, so I'll do it, and I'll get a job, right? And it's not to say that that's the American experience, but there's there's a little bit of a vibe
No, it's
with
there.
that.
It's
Yeah,
there. It's definitely there for most of your state schools, and you see it in your classes. You can tell some people aren't engaged, and what, to each his own, right? We don't need to pick apart everybody's own experience, but it shows. If you don't put that work in and you don't find that real world experience, you can. Some of your friends don't make it to where they want to make it, or they take different paths that take a little bit longer to figure out where they're going, and that's it's fine, but you got to put in the work extra on top of your classwork. And I think that's pretty universally known for US students.
yeah, yeah. And as you're doing that, I think it is worth keeping the word materialism in mind. There is a certain career materialism that comes with American culture. It's everything from all the different titles. And, I've got son starting high school, like all the different labels that people have when they're in one year, and then it's like rising junior, sophomore, freshman. I'm like, why are there all these titles? To me, it comes down to the idea in American culture that you have to be an important individual. And that comes from what I understand, religion. That if you weren't an important individual, if you didn't work hard, you weren't getting into heaven. And whether you're religious or not, that idea seems to be very much at the heart of capitalism, which is to say, historically speaking, from what I understand, that capitalism and religion were pretty connected through the Puritans and the Calvinists. Taking you on a segue there, but everyone does have their own journey. I think it's useful to see this thing not just as this little business career, but to see it as some kind of art and intellectual pursuit, even though you could get lost in those two concepts as well. The idea of strategy, for example, being art or an intellectual pursuit. Because the point of strategy and advertising is to affect the work that appears in public and for that to be effective.
Right.
Did I lose you on
I'm
Puritanism?
sorry. No, I'm just taking notes, and I wasn't sure if you cut out there, but you know. So, can you recap real quick what the point of strategy is? I want to make that very clear.
So the way that I define the word is that it's an informed opinion about how to win. You take information, you form an opinion about it, you are guessing the future. It's a very arrogant thing to do. You don't know the future. A lot of people who do strategy in all kinds of strategy ways and management consultants they think they can predict the future. Maybe you can try to reduce the amount of unpredictability of the future, but you're still making it up. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And to do so means that you need to appreciate data and facts and information, but then you need to take leaps with it, lateral thoughts, ideas, think conceptually, possibly in abstract ways, while still being able to articulate yourself in simple ways, and the context of that is winning, typically, right? And to win, you need to make decisions based on your strategy. So strategy helps you make decisions. Those decisions help you allocate your time and money, resources, and people. And the point of it in advertising is to help whatever appears in public, usually in public, be more effective. The point is not the thinking by itself. It needs to be able to affect the creative work, the advertising that appears in public. Now, some of us have spent years thinking that our work was going to change businesses internally, and sometimes it does. But I think now advertising is more advertising than it's ever been. And so that's why I think it's okay to say that if you work in advertising, your role in strategy is to help
Mhm.
inform the creative work and make sure that it's more effective than it would have been or might have been without you.
Nice. But decisions are a huge part of that, and that's what gets you to make it effective or not. So, and decisions basically, or what I'm going to assume here, come from the individual, and you probably have to know yourself pretty well to make these decisions. So, what type of decision maker are you? What type of strategist are you? How would you characterize your own line of thought in the
That's a
easiest way
different.
possible?
I might need some examples, but yeah, the way I increasingly see strategy, it's not novel. It's not necessarily novel, but I just see it in a really clear way now. Is that when you're coming up with strategy, you're typically trying to solve some kind of problem, and you do so with maybe like a keyword or two, an organizing idea, an idea that everything can come from. And then there are certain actions or actions you can take, behaviors that you can do that fit with your set of values, and these things form this little operating system for you. So, for example, I didn't really enjoy working in many agencies in New York. Some of them were good. I felt misled, possibly lied to, and gaslit in a couple. And so I could state my problem as, you know what? And here's the thing, because sometimes I would teach strategy on the side, and I was like, I really enjoy this. I enjoy this, but I'm just not enjoying the job. So I could state my problem as something like that. That after almost 2 decades, pretty much 2 decades in the industry, I enjoyed the idea of doing strategy. I enjoyed doing it, but I didn't enjoy the experience of it, the job of it, something like that. But my language would be shorter and sharper. So
Mhm.
then, how have I solved that? From an identity point of view, I kind of in my head, and I know it sounds pretentious, but I'm trying to shift into this identity of being an artist. And to talk like that might make people cringe. I get it. These are new words to me to think of myself as an artist. But an artist to me doesn't care about rules, and they spend their lives trying to reveal profound truth. Right? So that's how I'm trying to solve the problem. Like I don't fit in to corporate America where there are a lot of rules. My solution to that, my strategy is to create a life based on my own rules. There's no amazing epiphany there. That was a hard and long learned lesson, but it's where I'm at. And then there are certain beliefs that I return to every single day. Because when you're doing your own thing, you have to work out what you're doing nearly every single day. When you're an employee, you get to outsource a lot of your decisions to somebody else, maybe to a timesheet or to an account manager or a producer or a project manager or a boss. You're turning up to meetings and you know that you don't really need to be there, but it's cool. You get to spend half your day in this meeting in a business park in New Jersey. Whereas when you're doing your own thing, you're like, oh gosh, if I don't do anything, no one else is going to do it for me, and no one
Mhm.
else really cares. So then I have a series of principles that I play with, and they're things like I don't want to be beholden to time, so I don't charge time when I'm working with clients, and I try to make sure I don't have a lot of friction around my time. So if I'm going to record interviews for my podcast, I try to do them in batches because then I'm fighting with time less. I get a little bit overwhelmed by time and I panic, and there can be like this logistical pressure. But that sentence, first of all, from the idea of shifting from being an employee to an artist, pretty straightforward. And then I don't want to be beholden to time.
Okay.
Right. And another thought that comes with these kinds of changes is the word responsibility. When you do your own thing, you have to take responsibility for every single day. So that's another sentence. And so I've got a whole bunch of these sentences that are in my head that I access regularly. And that's my personal strategy.
Love it. I love it. I love it. And I kind of resonate with I could actually probably use some of these principles, being at home, waiting to start my career, and doing my own projects. I think those are pretty strong. Um, but like for the people out there right now that are listening that might be in an agency role or working remote for a corporation, can they apply this sort of artistic thought to their process, even though they're in a specific role right now? How can they
Sure.
apply this?
Yeah, part of it's just insisting that everything you do features some kind of self-expression or expression and or creativity, which means you need to know what those words mean. So creativity is combining things that don't usually belong together. That is what an idea is. So an idea isn't the output of creativity. So even if you're not in the creative department, maybe you can't do this all the time. And the problem is that you are often going to be in corporate cultures that don't want you to identify as being creative. They want that to be in a department, and then they want everyone to be obedient. And ideas
Mhm.
are necessarily disobedient because they defy what already exists, and people don't want to change. They want to keep what exists, generally speaking. So there's a lot of psychology going on with this. A lot of stuff. I don't know if you can say that. There's a lot of psychology. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of dynamics that go on
Sure.
behind this, right? But yeah, if you're an account manager, if you're a producer, one thing a day that you could do that's a little bit different, that's creative, you could do that. Doesn't mean that you're writing the next Nike campaign or manifesto, but you can
Mhm.
still exist as a creative spirit while still being a good business person, which is the primary role of an account
Mhm.
person.
Right. But you said that there are, you're assuming that there are some boundaries, and you said psychology within these agencies and corporations, but aren't they aren't these creative agencies for a reason? Don't they want to push the boundaries? I've never worked in one yet, but is it kind of controversial in that point where if you want to step outside the box, do they push you in? And I know it depends on where you're at, but what's the general thought in that area?
Yeah, so look, if we go a little bit deep and dark, it just shows me where my brain often goes. Creativity is chaos, it's defiance, right? And let's just pit chaos against order. The deep irony about advertising is how conservative it is. And I found it very conservative in America. Little c, I'm not
Mm,
talking politics here, but conservative as in conserving the status quo. If advertising wasn't so conservative, we wouldn't be having so many conversations about diversity and inclusion, because the industry would have done that. It would have sorted it out, but it didn't. And it held on to how it was, and it reinforced its own kind of power.
yeah,
If the industry was really creative, there probably wouldn't be a department called creative, or they wouldn't get to treat people badly, which they often do. They don't always do, but they often do that.
sure, sure.
And other people within that industry, or within other people within an agency, would be rewarded, would be heralded for their creativity. And that does happen, but I don't think it happens enough. And there would be creative leadership, not financial leadership, but creative leadership of agencies. So I think there's a deep irony that the creative industries are still quite power and they're still quite power and status quo oriented. I hope it can shift, because that means we'll get more interesting brains in the business. Uh, but I don't think agencies are really built to get the most out of their people, because they define the word most differently. They're about selling. They have to be profitable. I think
Right.
when people are like, we should be really creative and not care so much about profit, that's how you have an agency that doesn't last. So these things are always going to have some kind of arm wrestle. But most agencies don't know how to get most out of you. And the thing is, over time, give it 10 years, you realize that that's not their job. That's your job. And that's why we go back to one of the earlier concepts we were talking about, which is the idea of having your own practice and expressing because you need to practice, not because you have a timesheet to fill in. So these concepts, they come full circle. They fit together.
Yeah. Where were you? Where was your last agency at?
I had a few roles in New York. I don't know if I like to name them all. What do
No,
you?
you don't have
What's the
to.
next
But
question?
when was that? When was it?
I was in a couple of bigger places like 4 years ago. So I've been in New York for 9 years. 5 years of those were in other people's companies.
Sure. And you started off with your own magazine, and then you broke into strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a digital agency at 19, and I would stay back and make a very bad and simple hip hop website and then magazine. I taught myself how to use the software, and by day, I was a digital producer in between being at college, and I was helping to run the Levi's website and posting music interviews that I would do for that website. That was kind of the early days of branded content. We didn't use those two words together like that back then. And through my 20s, I was in like digital development oriented shops working on I managed all the Audi digital work in Australia because we just did it out of this small like website making company. I've worked at Tribal DDB. I've slept on the floor there many times under desks while also working on my magazine at night. And then when I was 28, I was freelancing just after I had around the time we had our first child. And I decided that I didn't want to be a producer anymore. I wanted to be a strategist. And there just weren't that many strategy roles. And they didn't really exist as specialist roles within the digital agency world, where I spent my first 9 or so years. And then Leo Burnett offered me a role as an account planner. That's what we called it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Leo Burnett in Sydney, which is really prolific. They do great work. And they have generally a respect for their planning department, which is more than many agencies, generally speaking. It's always
Sure,
difficult.
sure.
But that's, 28, that's when I moved into more of an account planning role. But I was an experiment. The experiment was, could you take someone who's made a rap magazine, done radio, created things for 10 years, and who still was going to be doing user experience and information architecture, which I've done for everyone from like banks to Kimberly Clark brands. And then could you add some brand planning techniques to that person? What does that look like? So at Leo Burnett, let's say it was a 50-50 split between digital and brand. And then after that, was at McCann in Sydney. We had a small team there, and then worked at Saatchi in New York and Big Spaceship down in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just I wanted to do good work at scale. And Australia's pretty flat hierarchically. I know some people can find it a bit conservative. I find it quite irreverent. And I was like, I just want to be able to do that kind of cheeky work at scale in America. And I found America. I probably had 4 or 5 years of culture shock.
Really?
Really, I just found it really. It's very talkative, first of all, and very hierarchical and very self-aware of of importance. And I was like, I don't know how to communicate in this because I just want to do. I just want to do good work, which is a silly thing you can say to yourself. Uh, it's a bit of a naive thing, really. Whereas other people are really good at working out the politics of what's going on and moving through it.
Right, right.
I was a bit spoiled by the fact that I'd done my own thing. And so my culture shock was also moving into bigger places, having done my own thing. If I wanted to publish an issue, release a CD, put up posters for an event I was doing, I'd just go do it. And then working in agencies, that all slows down. And then in the US, you fly. I was flying a lot in the US, all over the place. And you're hoping that you can get some good work through, but people have or had different ideas of what advertising was. And then you're in these meetings with 50 people. You could be in Minneapolis one week, rural Eastern France another week, and none of it's leading to better work. And so, yeah, you can try to enjoy it, but that's not what I was here for. So I would get quite frustrated.
Was it ever intimidating for you going into those big rooms with like 50 people and flying off, with that culture shock?
Yeah, at times. Yeah, it sort of balances weird introversion. I sort of justify my introversion by having a bit of an outsider mentality. So when I go into rooms, even when I was young, I never felt like I fitted in anywhere, honestly. And I know people struggle with that these days because I'm increasingly becoming like a middle-aged white man, and people will use those words every now and then to point out the fact that I am a increasingly middle-aged white man. But growing up, divorced family, I was by myself a lot, younger sister, between homes, and so I never really fitted in anywhere. I had friends from different groups, and so I kind of have carried that with me. So on the one hand, I'd feel intimidated and odd, but on the other hand, I was just like, I don't know, it's just normal. I always feel odd.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. I definitely, I'm not sure how I'm going to feel when I get into a meeting or anything like that. I feel it's scary when, having a couple internships kind of gets you ready. But when you're at the agency or you're at your company and you are an intern, it's kind of like everybody's very aware of that. They hold your hand. They're like, "Oh, good job, you shared," and they clap for you. But like, it's gonna be kind of a transition having an entry level role. I think a lot of people are gonna be facing that soon whenever they start their jobs.
Yeah, it's hard to give any quick advice to that. I just think and this is just because this is what I like, it's what I respond to. Try to develop your own opinions. Never be afraid to have your own opinion. You might need to watch how you express it, and that is
Sure.
also something that an Australian with 10 to 20 years experience has to learn as well. That opinions matter more in hierarchy in America than in other places around the
Yeah.
world. Some places are really flat. So in Scandinavia, for example, there's a really famous agency uh, that has this thing called is open table or open floor, and also the agency. No one has job titles, so you could be the boss, but you're not. And they come and present work on the floor. They get around and they talk about it, and then they go and do their stuff. But there's no explicit hierarchy. There's often implicit hierarchy in groups, so that's also a bit of a thing you've got to navigate. Whereas America's super hierarchy conscious, very top down. Uh, and so I think it's important just to keep practicing whatever it is that's drawn you to this thing. And I hope it's more than money. But if you're interested in writing or learning about people, researching, keep practicing that stuff on the side where you can, or on the day job. Form opinions, write little memos. Whatever you're doing, write. You need to be able to practice writing, and give yourself limited space. How could I get my thoughts together in half a page or one page but double spaced, and then
Hmm.
get the thoughts down and make them better, and that's it. And you do that for a few years, chip away at your ability to see patterns and express them. Even if you have not shared them with many people, you will improve. You do need feedback from some kind of mentor, which sort of fulfills the concept called deliberate practice, which is how sports players get good at stuff. They have concepts broken down into small parts, they practice them really deliberately and like it's a live game, and then they get feedback from a coach, right?
Right.
So there are certain principles that you can apply to this. And then I think realize that some people who are drawn to power are not going to be empaths, and there will be bad behavior out there. From what I understand, I hope this is correct. Relative to the average population in leadership roles, there are something like 4 times more sociopaths, right? So companies are these weird entities that have got the rights of humans. I'm going to lose you on this, aren't I? They've got the rights of humans. We sort of turn them into humans, but they have more rights than humans. And then they hire people who aren't very human to run them often. It's not a diss about every single person who runs a company at
Sure,
all,
sure. I
but
can.
it's just to be aware that there are certain tendencies within companies, right? Uh, and then the people who aren't like that, some people are great. A lot of people are just trying to work it out. And you could be in a room with someone who's super powerful, important, and their marriage is falling apart, their father's dying, and people are just trying to hold on. So as long as you go into it trying to improve, trying to be useful, there's a certain naivety and arrogance of youth that I think is good. As long as you don't throw it in people's faces, then you can have a good career. The one other thing about the career is it's not going to be as long as your peers in other industries,
Right.
statistically speaking. So that's something that's another reason to stay active with your own expression, because you might hit your mid 30s, definitely mid 40s, and the job's gone. What are you going to be then? Because you're not going to know yourself, because your identity was your job, especially in America, right? Where the job and the career, that is your identity. That's why you talk about it all the time. A number of times I'm in cafes around here and people are talking about their bosses and their jobs, and I'm like,
Well,
whoa, what is this?
well, what about not so much the name of the job is your identity, but I always kind of subscribe to the thought that the role that you had was kind of like your career path. Like if you go all in on strategy, let's say, you can be known as a strategist, and then the names of the agencies are just resume
Yeah.
builders.
Yep. What I've realized in the past year or two, this is my hypothesis. I have no idea if it's original or not. It works for me. Is that it's not even the role, it's your verbs,
What do you mean by that? What you've done?
what you do.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things when I'm talking to people, I ask them a few questions when they're trying to work their lives out. The first one is, do you identify more as an artist, an entrepreneur, or employee? And I define those words in a particular way to force a decision from them, because it's a thought experiment. And then eventually we talk about the verbs. What do they like to do in life? Me, I like to write. Now, if I'd written that down on a piece of paper, the word write or writing, the word teach, listening, deep, awkward conversations, if I'd written words like that on a piece of paper at your age, I would have thought, nah, that's bullshit. That's ridiculous. I got to be more professional or more formal. Or honestly, back then, I was like, screw the systems. I hate systems. Why do I have to be someone who fits into someone else's nonsense system? That was probably more of what was going on in my head,
Nice.
right? But now I wake up and I'm like, okay, trying to live some kind of artist life. And I know it's pretentious, maybe. What do I do? Well, I need to express, need to write, need to draw. So go do it. Okay, cool. So
Well,
they're super powerful. That's part of my operating system too. Those
well,
verbs.
doesn't that change every couple years, or as your life changes, like what
Maybe.
you want, and those verbs are not constant, like you said when you were younger.
Well, the verbs are constant. They're things that I used to do back then. I can see. And maybe it's like a selection bias in that I'm forcing myself to see the connection, but I can see the
Okay.
connection. I've always written. I've written since I was 4 years old. Like, for the sake of writing journals and postcards and letters and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people have, but not everyone. So no, what I believe is that there are certain personality traits that stay in your orbit, and certain verbs, certain actions that connect to those personality traits that stay in your orbit. And then it's a 10, 20-year journey as an adult into your 30s and 40s to work out what actually matters. And then through crisis after crisis, you have no choice but to focus on those things. And as you focus on those things, you're going to feel like you're giving everything away, that you failed. And then if you persist and you keep going, chances are you can come out of it in a beautifully candid, honest way because you've had your head in the fire for 20 years and it wasn't working. That's basically my version of what
Yeah.
screenwriters would call a hero's journey, right? And that's like the phoenix rising again kind of scene. But I believe what I just said is what I feel, and having spent a little bit of time around philosophy and psychology, I think it's real that journey is pretty common to people, especially people who feel that they're creative.
There's no shortcut.
There are never any shortcuts. Young people always want the shortcut. Like if you want to get good at writing a brief, a shortcut could be I'll give you a creative brief template. Doesn't mean you can write.
Right.
Doesn't mean you understand humans.
Well, no,
Doesn't mean that you understand history.
to figure out, bare bones what you like to do. I mean, are there exercises or, you know, things that we can do to really hone in on what we love?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them shortcuts though. I think stream of consciousness writing is basically a written version of talk therapy. And in the startup world, you see a lot of people talking about morning pages, which was popularized in a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, from what I understand. And a lot of that just mimics talk therapy, but you're writing on a piece of paper and you're just letting it flow, often in the mornings. And you might aim to fill
Hmm.
1 page or 3 pages. And you could just write whatever you think. And then over time, you could give yourself little writing exercises. An example that I sometimes do, that I was doing when I was writing a book. I don't know if you've ever written a book. It's quite intimidating, but I enjoyed it and want to do it again. But there was this one day where I sat down and I was trying to answer the question, what am I doing here? And that question blurted into my mind, and I sat down and just wrote because I knew I need. Excuse me, I just burped because I had some lunch. You can edit that out. But like I knew that I wanted to finish this book, and I knew that I want to be there for other people who identify as being empathic, introspective, creative souls, and I'm happening to do that through this Sweathead community right now. And so I would write, and it would ground me. So writing morning pages, that's not a shortcut.
Nice.
Plenty of people, be careful with this stuff. Some people trip and they take ayahuasca and they hope for some kind of epiphany, and sometimes it happens. It depends on how you do it, depends on your set and setting. I've not done those things, I've just read the research. uh, but it's a process, and it's usually through crisis. And at your age, you are, and I don't know, like maybe I'm just, there are ideas that have stuck with me from other people that feel true. But at that age, you're still forming your identity, and you're forming more of an independent identity away from being dependent on family. And part of that is about shedding the social persona that your family told you was okay, some of which is just going to be innate in you. Like I can see a few generations of men in my family now that are relatively quiet and introspective. I don't think that's because they all happen to be taught by their family that they shouldn't be loud. There's probably a bit of a trait there that's inherited. But the 20s is largely, a lot of people are going to try to establish their like a big man or big woman on campus vibe right now, get that job. And then a few of you within 2 or 3 years, you'll know someone who's had a successful sale of a startup, who's a really unnecessarily young CMO of a well-known company. And you're going to resent it. And you'll be like, why aren't I like that? And you're going to carry that energy around. I've seen it in meetings. I've managed teams, and some of the young people were like, I've got a friend who's a CMO at 25. And I'm like, what's that got to do with our conversation? But there's a certain resentment that boils with them because they're constantly comparing themselves to people. And they're going to do that because everyone's infatuated with social media. So it's just a process. Process might be a wrong word, but it's a matter of learning how to pay attention to yourself while knowing that sometimes it's crisis after crisis, trying to do the same thing, realizing your coping mechanisms, the things that you were trying to do, maybe the things that kept you safe when you were young. At some point, they stop working. And then you're like, ugh, now what am I going to do?
Yeah.
There's no shortcut for that.
Love it. Love it. Well, I appreciate it. I think that this is fantastic advice, and I just love that different cultural perspective on our American culture. Being so self-aware of our roles and our in the system and how everything plays out. It's so true, and it's something that I never really addressed. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't mean to put it down. Like, it's amazing. In Australia, growing up, you would see news, for example, or with the late shows, you might see someone like a child being interviewed on television in America, and they were just so able to talk. And Aussies, we're like a bit embarrassed. We've got a bit of a put down culture, and so Aussies would be like, "Oh yeah, nah, yeah, I don't know, yeah, you know." And there's like a 6-year-old American, "Da-da-da-da-da-da," and you're like, "Wow, they can really talk over there, can't they?" But then when you move here and you don't have a script for the 20th introduction you have to do in a meeting, you're like, "Oh, I've really got to sort this out, but I'm so embarrassed that I have to do it in the way that everyone else does it." And then, I've done a lot of events in America, and what I love is there's an openness to that interaction being on a stage. And I could ask someone to introduce themselves to someone next to them or participate in some kind of group exercise. And there's way less cynicism around that stuff in America than many other places I've been. And I appreciate that. I love it. It's just that when you're in it and you're trying to survive and justify your presence in a meeting, you're like, oh, am I supposed to talk now? Because I do not know what people are talking about. And it seems like they're talking about stuff that doesn't matter. And that's, I've struggled with that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
America's an interesting place.
I think we all have like our own internal like scripts on how we introduce ourselves and who we are, and like our own little pitch. Or everybody's got their own little elevator pitch ready to go.
What's yours?
I don't know. I had one.
Whoa!
I had one. Well, now that I had one in college, like for my interviews. Um, but now that I'm podcasting, I'm talking to all these different people, and I'm exploring different options. I know I like to talk to people, and that's like a big part of my own story. But
So you're
I don't
exploring
know
different options. That means you're conscious of the need to be able to introduce yourself well, aren't you?
what's that.
So when you say that you're exploring options, you're partly serious, right? With that, and that means that you're conscious of the need to have a self-introduction script.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I
and
think
I
you
was
need
I
one.
was not at your age.
Well, yeah, but now nobody wants to hear a perfect one. Nobody
Yeah,
wants to be like, "Oh, you
I'll,
actually practiced it." It's like,
I'll give you one that'll get a job. Let's say you're being interviewed in a group. Are you ready for it?
yep.
My name's Gino. This is what I sound like with an Australian accent. Okay, so you've got to copy that accent that I just did, and that's it. Drop the mic. You'll get the job.
Will that work?
Yeah, you got to go. See, I went a little broader. I don't know if you heard it there. I went 15% broader with
Yeah,
the Aussie accent. So
yeah.
just drop it in. They can't have heard you talking before because Gino is just the perfect Aussie nickname.
All
Gino,
right.
mate.
I appreciate. Good eye, mate.
No, what's that? What's that?
I don't know.
G'day, mate. G'day,
Good eye,
mate.
mate.
Yeah, the thing I know you got to go, but the thing with the Australian accent is that this is the way of Australian. The way that Australians talk is we don't use our facial muscles very much. It's as if we're a little bit drunk or might have been drunk for 100 years, and there are a lot of flies trying to get into our mouths, and so we
Oh,
shorten everything and slur a lot of stuff, and you know that's the
that's
trick.
good.
That's the trick,
That's
mate. That'll get you a job at Droga 5. No, don't do that. They would hate
it.
that.
I was just as you were saying that, I was thinking about Droga 5 the whole time.
No, no.
Cool.
They'd be like, "What's this about?"
Cool. So, Mark, I just wanted to quickly touch upon, the book that you just put out, Strategy is Your Words. That was recent, right? That was in May.
Yeah, I released it a couple of weeks ago actually. So I finally arrived in the USA in July, and
Okay.
it's gently shipping within the USA. I've not done any big launch for it yet. I just needed to test the shipping and everything.
Okay. Well, this is going to be your big launch then with our millions of listeners. But
It's good. That's good. I hope
who's it
so.
for, this book? I know you got the podcast, you've got your own business going on, but for this book, is it for a specific audience, or what's the age range? What are the demographics for this book?
Look, big part of this book is for me. It's me processing moving into my 40s. It's me trying to make sense of the past 9 years in America, although I started on it 7 years ago, and some of that was using content from much before as well. And so I think if you're going to do art, I do keep people in mind. I have a lot of conversations with people in advertising every day, messages and phone calls and all sorts of things. And so when I write, they're in my mind very much. But that's at the paragraph level. But as a body of work, it's for me. It's it's my art. I want to express myself through it. It's not a business book, and I don't like the idea that a business book is the new business card. I refuse to accept that. This is my art. It's weird, and it's fun, and some people will enjoy it. But the people who will get it the most are people who are capable and interested in empathy and introspection and creativity. They don't see those things as deformities or weaknesses. The people who will struggle with it are people who are very concrete oriented and important people. And there will be people who've done MBAs, for example, who'll totally get the book, but it's not really for that kind of real buttoned up, formal, hierarchical person. It's for someone who's a little bit messy and might have been told throughout their lives that messiness is them being broken. Whereas what I believe is that if you pay attention to it and stop judging it, there's probably some pretty good treasure in that mess.
Wonderful. It's a quote you, and I hope it's right, but here's how to get good at strategy. Words. Start with words, continue with words, and finish with words. You have one job. Get good at words.
Word. That's what I believe. It's what I believe. And it's a really obvious thing to point out. It's something that I point out and people will and probably have made fun of. It's like, duh. But then why are so many strategy presentations so long and difficult to understand? Why do so many creative departments not want to work with strategists or account planners? Why do so many clients mistrust strategists in their agencies or in their in-house teams? And it's not that it stops and starts with, well, hang on. It's not, look, I think words is a big part of it. If you're using jargon and hiding behind big words and a lot of words, it's not a good customer experience, is it? Not a good customer experience of strategy. And so this book is just a bit of a primal scream to get people to try to focus on what really matters. And there's a whole bunch of practical techniques mixed with absurdist philosophy as well.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you sharing, and I appreciate all the advice. If students or listeners of this podcast want to reach out or learn more about you and all of your endeavors, how should they go about that?
You can find me at Mark Pollard on Twitter and Instagram, or you can find my book, 100 Strategy Classes, and the Facebook community at Sweathead or sweathead.com, www.sweathead.com.
Amazing. And I will put all links to that in the bio. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you again, Mark.
All right, Gino, good luck with it. It's a monster of a career. It won't last as long as we would hope, but within it, you're learning critical thinking skills. You're surrounded by other people trying to express themselves in the world and trying to fit into the world. And you can learn so much about humanity. It's not easy. You'll probably work too many hours at times, and you need to think about whether that's worth it. But it is a very interesting and career with quite a lot of privilege to it. So best wishes to you and all your friends who are trying to get into it. May you survive it and do more than just survive in it.
I appreciate it.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you guys so much for listening to the entire episode of the Breaking and Entering podcast. This one was especially amazing with Mark Pollard. I was super excited to have him, super nervous, as you can tell. So I apologize about me being so awkward, but that's just how it is sometimes. I got to give a shout out to my team. Can't do it without you guys. We got Mikey Malarkey, audio technician. We got Buchan Jung, our graphic designer, who's just killing it. Everybody's killing it, but Audrey Nussbaum, our co-host. We got Kyle Moore, who's our strategist all the way out in Texas. You're my guy. And lastly, we got a new guy, Jacob Rodino, who's representing the student group that's going to be helping us out soon. He's a researcher. Thank you to all of you. Can't do it without you. Love you guys. Next week, not sure what we have, but keep in touch because these guests are getting awesome. Bye-bye.